I think we have all been there at some point. You know that feeling. When you're absolutely 100% on board with a movement, you believe in the message, the goal. You might have even put the bumper sticker on your car. But then you look at the person holding the microphone, the face of the group, and you just, well, you cringe.
It's a very common, very human tension. It's basically the political version of separating the art from the artist.
Yes.
You love the song, it speaks to your soul, but you really, really don't want to have dinner with the singer because they're, a nightmare.
Exactly. It's that whole conflict of, I want to save the whales, but the guy running the Save the Whales organization just bought a third yacht and keeps tweeting nonsense.
Right. And usually we just chalk that up to hypocrisy or maybe just bad PR.
Yeah.
But the stack of sources we're unpacking today argues that this isn't just an annoyance, it's actually a distinct psychological framework. And more than that, in certain parts of the world, this separation between the cause and the leader isn't just a preference, it's a survival mechanism.
That is what grabbed me about this deep dive. We're looking at a document that analyzes this phenomenon under the name the Principled Skeptic.
The Principled Skeptic. It sounds dignified, doesn't it?
It does. It sounds like a badge of honor.
And the source material, it breaks this down into two very distinct layers. So first, it looks at the universal philosophy, why we instinctively try to create this buffer zone between our values and the people in charge.
Right.
But then, and this is where this deep dive gets really intense, it applies that philosophy to a specific real-world case study. The multi-generational struggle for Macedonian identity, or Macedonatina.
And I'll be honest, when I first saw Macedonian identity in the stack, I wasn't totally sure how it connected to a broad leadership philosophy. But reading through this, it just clicked.
Yeah.
It shows what happens when that distrust of leadership stops being a choice and becomes, well, the only way a culture can keep existing.
It really is the ultimate stress test for this theory. The source argues this isn't just about being cynical. It's about distinguishing between immutable truths and fallible people.
So let's start with the framework itself before we get into the history. The Principled Skeptic.
Right.
The source basically says this whole mindset comes from a tension between idealism and ego.
Right. So think of it this way. On one side, you have the cause. In our source, this is described as a moral North Star.
Okay.
These are abstract concepts: justice, equality, faith, or, in the case study we'll get to, the survival of a heritage.
And the beauty of abstract concepts is that they're perfect. Justice never gets caught embezzling funds.
Exactly. Equality doesn't have a secret family in another country. The cause is pure because it isn't human.
But then you have the other side of the equation.
The leaders.
These are the humans tasked with navigating the messy, logistical world of reality. And humans are prone to, well, mission creep. They have egos. They are susceptible to the corruptive nature of authority. So the logic of the Principled Skeptic is basically self-defense.
It's protective. The source outlines the logic as, if I tie my support to a person, my belief system is held hostage by their behavior.
Ah, I see.
But if I tie my support only to the cause, my integrity remains intact even if the leader crashes and burns.
It's like emotional hedging. You're diversifying your portfolio so you don't go bankrupt if one stock tanks.
It's exactly that. The source actually calls it moral insurance.
Moral insurance, that's a great term.
It protects you from the hero's fall. If a leader you supported turns out to be corrupt, you don't have to have an identity crisis. You just say, well, they weren't a true representation of the movement anyway.
Right. You dust yourself off, and the cause remains shiny and new.
The source also mentions this idea of efficacy. It becomes a transactional relationship.
So you don't have to like the person to use the tool.
Yes. This is the shut up and do the work approach. You might donate to a charity because their work on the ground is vital. Maybe they are the only ones getting food into a war zone.
Right.
You might think the CEO is arrogant or hate their public persona, but you support the mechanism because it gets the job done. You separate the utility from the personality.
It reminds me of the arguments for decentralized systems, actually, like crypto or open source software.
Yeah.
The whole selling point is that there is no king of Bitcoin. There's no single point of failure.
And that is the third benefit the source lists: decentralization. If the movement doesn't rely on one charismatic figurehead, it's harder to kill.
That makes sense.
If you take out the leader of a centralized organization, the organization often collapses. But if the movement is just an idea shared by millions of skeptics, it's like a hydra.
Okay, so that all sounds great. It sounds smart, really. Why put all your eggs in one fragile human basket?
But
Reading through the critique in the source, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No, there is a very big but coming. The source pivots here to offer a critique of this philosophy, because while leaderless support sounds intellectually superior, it creates a lot of friction in the real world.
Because eventually, someone has to actually sign the checks.
Exactly. The source calls this the problem of execution. Causes don't sign legislation. Causes don't organize supply chains for disaster relief.
Leaders do.
Leaders do. The source argues that by distancing yourself completely from the how, meaning the leadership, you risk becoming a passive observer. You're sitting in the stands cheering for the idea of the game, but you refuse to support the players on the field because they aren't playing perfectly.
That makes a lot of sense. You can be so pure that you're actually useless. You're just a critic in the balcony.
And it leads to what the source calls the no true Scotsman trap.
Oh, right. The fallacy where you keep moving the goalposts. No true Scotsman would put sugar on his porridge.
Right. In this context, it creates a cycle where no leader is ever good enough. If a leader compromises to get a law passed, let's say they get 80% of what the movement wanted, the principled skeptic says, aha, a traitor. A true leader wouldn't compromise at all.
So you end up with a movement that remains ethically pure, but politically powerless.
Precisely. Because to get anything done in politics or any organization, you have to get your hands a little dirty. You have to herd the cats, as the source puts it.
Herding the cats is the perfect phrase.
The coordination gap is real. Historical progress almost always requires someone to take the heat and make the hard calls. If everyone is a principled skeptic, there's no one left to actually interface with the status quo.
So what's the verdict here? Does the source say we should just blindly follow leaders because it's more efficient?
No, not at all. But it calls the support the cause, never the leader stance a defensive crouch.
Defensive crouch.
It's a way to stay safe. The source suggests the sweet spot is something called critical support.
Critical support. Break that down for me.
It means holding leaders to the standard of the cause without expecting them to be the cause itself. You support them when they advance the mission, you criticize them when they don't, but you don't pretend that the mission can exist entirely without human agency.
So you accept the vehicle even if it has a few dents.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so that's the theory. That's the universal framework. But the source takes a sharp turn here and applies this to a specific group of people, the Macedonians. And this is where the stakes go from organizational psychology to, well, existential crisis.
It really does, because for the Macedonian diaspora and those in the homeland, this isn't just some philosophical debate about a charity CEO or a political candidate. This is about the survival of an identity that has been threatened for over a century.
The source uses this term, make it Donatina.
Yes, Macedoniana. It translates roughly to Macedonianness, or the Macedonian spirit. But the source defines the cause here as an immutable identity.
So it's not just a political platform or a set of policy goals.
No, it's the inherent right to exist. The source breaks down the Macedonian cause into a few key tenets. First and foremost, the right to the name. The right to be called Macedonian without prefixes, without qualifiers, without asterisks.
Which, if you follow Balkan politics even a little bit, you know, is a massive, massive issue.
Huge. And beyond the name, it's about historical justice. The source specifically mentions the Dekabegalci, the refugee children.
Right, I wanted to ask about that. These were the children evacuated during the Greek Civil War in the late 1940s, correct?
Correct. Thousands of ethnic Macedonian children were evacuated for safety, sent to Eastern Europe. But after the war, many were stripped of their citizenship, their property was confiscated, and they were never allowed to return.
Wow.
Never allowed to return to their homes in northern Greece.
So when the cause is discussed in this document, it's carrying the weight of that trauma. It's not just abstract justice, it's let me go home.
Exactly. It includes the legacy of the Ilinden uprising against the Ottomans. It includes preserving the villages and regions like Laren, Koster, and Vodin. So apply the principled skeptic framework to that.
Yeah.
You have this incredibly deep, heavy cause. And then you have politicians.
I can see the friction already.
Yeah.
You have a cause that is sacred to the people, and you have leaders who are dealing with treaties and trade deals.
And the source calls it the compromise trap. Macedonian leaders, whether in Skopje or in the diaspora organizations, are often forced into the realm of realpolitik.
Right.
They have to deal with the EU, with NATO, with neighboring countries who hold a lot of leverage.
The source brings up the Prespa Agreement as the prime example here. That was the deal that changed the constitutional name to North Macedonia.
It does, and this is the perfect illustration of the conflict. To a leader, the Prespa Agreement might look like a pathway to progress entry into NATO, economic stability, getting a seat at the table.
But to a supporter of the cause,
To someone holding on to that immutable truth of Macedonia, that isn't a strategy. It feels like a betrayal of the ancestors.
it's negotiating away the non-negotiable.
Exactly. So you see this massive disconnect. The source describes a vanguard versus the people dynamic. The political elite in Skopje are dealing with diplomatic pressures, while the regular Macedonian, especially in the diaspora, just wants their history taught accurately and their name respected.
And this is why that distrust of leadership isn't just cynicism for them, it's a defense mechanism.
Yes.
If the leaders are willing to sign away the name, then the people have to disconnect the cause from the leader, or the cause dies.
That is the crucial point. If they followed the leader blindly, the identity would have been erased the moment the treaty was signed. And this brings us to the role of the diaspora. The source focuses heavily on places like Toronto, Melbourne, Detroit,
Yeah, it calls them guardians or moral watchdogs.
because they aren't tied to the daily grind of Balkan parliamentary politics. They don't have to worry about EU funding or diplomatic cables or whether the gas gets turned off in winter.
So in a place like Toronto, the cause feels purer.
Yes, and the source says they act as a cultural vault.
I thought that was a powerful image of vaults.
It is. They reject the compromises the leaders in the homeland might be forced to make. They maintain the independent voice. They can advocate for human rights in Greece or Bulgaria without the diplomatic handcuffs that bind a government official in Skopje.
But this raises a serious logistical question. If the people reject the leaders, if they say, I don't trust the politicians in the capital, how does the identity survive? Who runs the show if not the government?
That is the million-dollar question. If you cut off the head, how does the body live? The source lays out the pillars of the Macedonian cause. These are the things that hold the identity together when leadership fails or is rejected.
Number one on that list, village and family bonds.
This is fascinating because it shifts the focus from the macro to the micro. The cause isn't necessarily a map of a country with borders. It's a specific village. The source mentions examples like Bof, Banitsa, Ashima.
I noticed that it's hyper-local. Why does the village matter more than the state?
Because the state is volatile, borders change, regimes change, but the village memory is tangible. Leaders can sign treaties, they can change flags, but they cannot rewrite a family's history in their specific village.
I see.
The survival of the cause happens in the kitchen. It lives in the local dialects that maybe aren't even written down. It lives in the recipes. It lives in the retelling of the Zulumi, the oppressions that forced them to leave in the first place.
So even if the prime minister signs a document you hate, you still make the Zelnik, you still speak the dialect, you still tell your grandkids about the village square.
Yep.
The leader can't touch that.
Exactly. It decentralizes the identity. It makes it uncancelable. The second pillar involves the dynamic between the Staro Kraj, the old country, and the diaspora.
We touched on this, but the source describes it as a friction between rigid traditionalism and survivalism.
Right. The diaspora acts as that cultural vault we mentioned, often being more rigid about the identity. Meanwhile, the homeland is in survival mode, facing economic and political pressure. But the source argues that this tension is actually a pillar of survival.
How so?
It ensures that even if the homeland is forced to compromise, the memory remains intact abroad. They balance each other out.
And the third pillar.
Cultural and mutual aid societies. This is the mini-government concept.
Oh, right, because for a long time, Macedonians didn't have a state at all.
Correct. When you don't have a state to protect you, or when the state is actively hostile to your identity, you build your own structures. Benefit societies to help newcomers find jobs, churches where the language is spoken freely, media and arts to document the history that the official books ignored.
It's basically a parallel society.
It is. And it proves that you don't need a leader in the presidential palace to have a functioning community. These societies preserved the identity for decades without any official government backing. In fact, they often survived despite government attempts to suppress them.
So, bringing it all back to the principled skeptic, the source argues that for Macedonians, this stance, support the cause, never the leaders, is actually a safety valve.
A fail-safe mechanism. Think about it. If the Macedonian identity was 100% tied to a specific leader or a specific political party, and that leader signed the Prespa agreement.
The identity would logically have to collapse. It would be game over.
Right, because the leader betrayed the core tenets, so the whole structure falls.
But by having this buffer zone, the community can do something very specific.
They can disown the leader. They can say that person is no longer one of us, or that person is a traitor. They cut the limb to save the body.
The leader goes, but the cause remains.
The cause keeps moving forward through those grassroots pillars, the villages, the churches, the diaspora groups. It ensures continuity.
There's a motto the source quotes, Samo Edna I Makedonija.
There is only one Macedonia.
It sounds like a slogan, but in this context, it feels like a declaration of independence from politics.
It implies that the identity is too large, too ancient, and too important to be sold or defined by any single politician. It's a way of saying, you can sign whatever you want, you can change the signs on the highway, but you can't change who we are.
It's really powerful stuff. It makes you rethink that initial idea of the principled skeptic. At the beginning, we talked about it like it was just a way to handle a disappointing CEO of a charity.
Yeah.
But in this context, it's a strategy for survival against history itself.
It is. But I do want to go back to the source's warning, or the verdict, because even in the Macedonian case, there is a danger. We can't ignore the downside we discussed earlier.
Defensive crouch.
Yes. If you perpetually distrust leadership, if you disown everyone who tries to negotiate or interface with the world, you risk isolation. You can keep the identity pure in the vault of the diaspora, but does that actually help the people living in the villages back home who need jobs and security? That's the tension that never really goes away.
It's the difference between preserving a museum piece and running a country. A museum piece is perfect, but it's frozen behind glass. A country is messy.
Precisely. And that is the challenge for the next generation. How do you move from guarding the flame to actually lighting the way forward without letting the wind blow it out?
Man, that is a lot to think about. We started with separate the art from the artist and ended up with the survival mechanics of a stateless nation.
That's the beauty of deep dives. You pull one thread and the whole tapestry unravels.
So to recap what we've learned today, we have the principled skeptic, a mindset that separates the perfect cause from the flawed leader. It gives us moral insurance, but risks making us passive observers.
And we saw how this plays out in the Macedonian struggle, where Macedonia is the immutable North Star, and political leaders are viewed as temporary, often compromising stewards.
We looked at the pillars that hold the identity together when leaders fail. The village bonds, the diaspora as a watchdog, and the mutual aid societies.
And ultimately, we saw that refusing to follow a leader isn't just stubbornness, it can be a fail-safe that ensures a threatened identity survives, regardless of what treaties are signed.
Which brings us to a final thought. We always like to leave you with something to chew on.
I'm thinking about that verdict section again. The source questions if this stance is just a defensive crouch. So here's my question for you, the listener. Is the refusal to follow leaders actually a form of cynicism that prevents progress? Or, in a world where history is often written by the victors, is that refusal the only way for a threatened identity to survive intact?
Is it better to be pure and powerless, or compromised and powerful?
That is the eternal question.
I have a feeling the answer depends on how much you have to lose.
I think you're right.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Whether you're a leader, a follower, or a principled skeptic, we're glad you're here.
Until next time.
Stay curious, everyone.